As has been stated a million times before on this channel, I'm a huge X-Men fan. And that's why today, we're going to be talking about Deadpool and Wolverine. The first one. Now this is widely regarded as the worst X-Men movie out of the whole lineup, and I don't entirely disagree. Which is a real shame because there are good, and even great elements in this movie that just get lost in a sea of nonsense. X-Men Origins Wolverine is a good movie, trapped inside a so bad it's good movie. I think a lot of the time the better aspects of this movie are completely forgotten, and it's only the bad parts that are remembered. Which is fair game, because if this movie is anything, it's memorable. So let's make like the topic at hand and start off on a high note and end with a disappointing middle and end. Let's talk about the good stuff. X-Men Origins mostly succeeds in terms of casting. Hugh Jackman is back as Wolverine, and since it's a part that he's played 3 times prior at this point, he's pretty much mastered the role. Although, having said that, I do think this is probably his weakest performance in the part. Nonetheless, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine at his worst is still Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, so it's good in spite of itself. He's tasked with playing the role a little bit more human, and I do think that somehow hampers down the actual character, making him feel a little bit different than before. But it also kind of feels like Jackman is unsure of what to do. He's trying to act like the character that we're all familiar with, but show a side of the character that we're all unfamiliar with, so it kind of feels like he gets stuck in limbo. Different isn't always bad, but here, well, it's not great. There would be much better attempts in the near and later future to humanize the mutant. This is also the first time we see Ryan Reynolds in the role of Deadpool, playing a version of the character much tamer than the one we're used to today. The Deadpool movie seems like a genuine attempt at depicting the deviant, whereas the Deadpool in this movie was an attempt to mold the degenerate into one of the Fox franchise's X-Men. And despite their best efforts to stifle the character and make him blend into the background with the rest of the disposable mutants, Reynolds still stands out in the short screen time that he's given, and his portrayal still rings true to the nature of the anti-hero. Unfortunately, it feels like he was featured more heavily in the marketing than the actual movie, though. Later on, when he does have a bigger part to play, it's not the part the actor signed up to play. But the real talking point and highlight of this horrible film is Liev Schreiber as Sabertooth. He's replacing Tyler Mane, who portrayed a much more primal variant of the villain in the first film. While I'm a fan of both actors in the role, it's clear that much different things were asked of the two. And despite being in the worst X-Men movie, Liev was still the best Sabertooth. He's described it as the most monstrous role he's ever had to play. And he wasn't kidding. The Sabertooth from Origins is savage and sadistic. He lives for chaos. He's not just a bad guy, he's the worst guy. From the beginning of this beginning movie, it's made clear that while Sabertooth and Wolverine are similar as mutants, they're polar opposites as people. From countless killings to even attempting to force himself on someone in the opening credits, this Sabertooth seemed more like a demon than he did a mutant. The film changes the relationship between Logan and Victor, choosing instead to make them siblings. It's a decision that some hate, but I myself find some merit in. It's obviously not the history they originally shared, but it genetically links these two foes together forever, which is fitting for characters who are constant in each other's lives. They've always been cut from the same cloth, with their mutations mostly being alike. And because mutations derive from genes, it stands to reason that one would affect the same gene pool in a somewhat similar manner. This has actually happened before in the X-Men. Havoc and Cyclops are brothers, and both shoot beams of energy out of their bodies. One from the chest, and one from the eyes. So Wolverine and Sabertooth sharing a healing factor, and extensive bone growths at their own will, seems like it sort of fits that motif. Considering that a lot of their past was kept the same in terms of both being soldiers in wars, and both being a part of the Weapon X program, I would say that this is less of an alteration, and more of an add-on to their relationship. However, in saying that, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever toward future interactions between these characters. Sabertooth definitely has a reaction to Wolverine, but it's not quite fitting of this particular backstory. I mean, Wolverine wouldn't have recognized him regardless due to the amnesia bullet he took at the end of this, but Sabertooth suffered no such fate. Why wouldn't he ever mention their prior history? And also, how did he turn into this? It makes no sense whatsoever. And speaking of making no sense, Danny Huston takes over the part of Colonel Stryker from Brian Cox in X2. And while he does a serviceable job in the villainous role, realistically, he could never replicate that first performance. The character's not made to look, sound, and for the most part, even act the same. So he never even comes off as the character that he's playing. It makes it that much stranger that he's even meant to be that character. Judging it on its own merit, the performance is fine as is. But it was an absolute disappointment when compared to the character from X2. It's good enough, but it's also not good enough. It was never going to live up to the unfair expectations that first actor had set. So I don't think it ever should have been attempted, let alone twice. But don't worry, we'll get there eventually. Logan's teammates are relatively fun too. The Blob is shown to be just as dumb as he is powerful, and he gets a couple of funny moments along the way. Bolt doesn't have too much to do, but at least he makes somewhat of an impression in his short screen time. Agent Zero is fine. He has a feud with Logan that means very little in the long run, but then again it also meant very little in the short run too, so I wouldn't say it was poorly acted or anything. The character just wasn't made to make an impression. They're all fairly serviceable in their parts. That's all I can really say about them. Because at the end of the day, they're just some of the many mutants in this movie. Aside from the cast, I find that a lot of my enjoyment of the film comes down to the more minor moments. It's like it's a failure in the forefront, but it succeeds in the little details in the background. It's like having window dressing for an abandoned house. For example, when Fred mishears Logan calling him Bub, and he thinks that he's calling him Blob.
Come on, Bub, for old time's sake, huh?
You just call me Blob?
It works on multiple levels. Or even having Emma Frost and Cyclops work side by side knowing their relationship in the comics. Of course, this amounts to nothing, and both of those characters would be recast shortly thereafter. Aesthetically speaking, this movie could look awesome at times. Wolverine's rocking his classic Logan look, the black leather jacket with the yellow stripes. I think this is the most he's ever looked like the actual character up until this point in time. The movie's well shot and edited, and the music is probably too good for the movie that it's attached to, if I'm being entirely honest. It adds to the weight of moments in what feels to be a glorified popcorn movie. Seriously, that opening alone is unforgettable. Actually, as a matter of fact, that's part of the problem. X-Men Origins opening is the most entertaining part of the whole movie. An intro montage that sees Logan and Victor serve together in war after war is then followed by the formation of Team X. It's all really good and short-lived fun. It's great seeing the team interact and, well, mostly threaten each other when their personalities clash. Funnily enough, Wolverine and Deadpool get little to no interaction whatsoever, save for this one line.
God, you ever shut up, pal? No, not when I'm awake.
Let's make a movie!
All of this should have lasted longer. This should have been the movie. Without question, this is the best part of the worst X-Men movie, which is probably why these were the parts that were highlighted when marketing it. X-Men Origins starts off by living up to its high expectations and then immediately dropping down to being a complete disappointment. It goes from X2 to The Last Stand real quick. And while it may sound like I'm being overly critical of the movie, I want you to remember that that was the positive list. Here come the negatives. I started the list of all things good with casting, so it seems only fitting that I start off the list of all things bad with that very same thing. While there were some pretty perfect performances, there were also plenty of imperfect portrayals. Taylor Kitsch is in this movie, and I don't know what more I could possibly add to that. His performance isn't awful, but it's also not anything. The script calls him Gambit, but he really just comes off as Guy. He's not the suave, charming Cajun from the comics. He's just some dude in a hat. He doesn't do anything but exist in this movie. And honestly, he's still somehow doing too much with that. He's there to do a couple card tricks and have a fight scene. That's it. On a similar note, Wolverine's love interest is not all that interesting. She's really only around to serve as motivation for Wolverine. She's an object for him to lose. She's also a Native American character, not played by a Native American woman. That's kinda distracting, because it's easy to forget that that's what this movie was going for until they start making vague mentions of it.
Why is the moon so lonely? Because she used to have a lover?
His name was Prequelitis, and they lived in the spirit world together.
Like Gambit, she's just another character who's sort of there. She's painfully generic, and her inclusion doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So she's hired by Stryker to get into Wolverine's head due to her mutant abilities of persuasion, but apparently her abilities don't work on mutants?
Your little mind games don't work on me.
Do you, have those powers over me?
You didn't stay in the car, did you?
So why would he hire her? Also, she's forced into Stryker's plan to save her sister, but why couldn't she just manipulate him as well? Or better yet, why couldn't she tell Wolverine about this in an attempt to try to save her sibling? I don't know, none of it really makes any sense, and I'm not going to try to make sense of it. Will.i.am should have been called an actor I am not. He plays Wolverine's buddy Kestrel, but he doesn't play him all that great. I wouldn't say that he's consistently bad, but some of his line readings seem like they're being done phonetically. I don't hate it in its entirety, and I think that kind of aggravates me more. When he needs to be funny, witty, or playful, he does a pretty good job. He's a likable character. But when he needs to sound threatening or have a commanding presence, it sounds like it's a foreign concept to him. He just can't take charge. I wish they either would have casted an actor who could properly portray the character, or alternatively, change the character to better suit the actor playing him. Of course, it's not going to be comic accurate, but then again, what in this franchise is? And leave it to X-Men Origins to take something awesome and make it something awful. Ryan Reynolds goes from being the most accurate Wade Wilson to being the most inaccurate Deadpool. How do you take the mouth off the merc with a mouth? It is literally in his name. It's somewhat important. I get that they were trying to justify the Deadpool look, because this was before comic-accurate costumes were really a thing, and on one hand, for this set of films, I think it makes about as much sense as anything else. He doesn't have a mouth on the mask, and he's got those black symbols around his eyes, but we're not doing masks, so, I don't know, just make his face look like that. Close enough. However, depriving Wade Wilson of his ability to speak is pretty much negating the entire purpose of that character. His selling point isn't his powers, it's his personality. And speaking of powers, he has all of them, even the ones the character doesn't actually have. This pool has powers poured into him, as the mutant is made into a machine, with Stryker giving him all his commands. Now he can shoot energy beams out of his eyes like Cyclops, he could teleport like Kestrel, and he has a healing factor like Wolverine. Although, to be fair, he always had that. Additionally, they've gone ahead and put his swords inside of him,
But not in a good way.
They gave him retractable Baraka blades. Ah, yes, that's exactly what I think of when I think of Deadpool. That is exactly how I remember him. Oh, Fox, you did it again, you fuck. Right guy, right part, wrong place to play that part. Also, from a storytelling standpoint, why would Stryker be so willing to make another unstoppable, indestructible killing machine when the last one he made just went rogue? This movie's biggest cinema sin is that it has a case of what I like to call prequelitis. It's when a movie that comes first is made after the first movie that's been made. So it goes out of its way to set up future events at the expense of the story that it's trying to tell. I'm talking about movies that spend their runtime answering questions that nobody was even asking. Like, where did Logan get the nickname Wolverine? And how did he get his leather jacket? When it's not answering these questions, it's including characters who have no place in the story. They're just there because they'll be there later. The young Cyclops cameo doesn't really do much and doesn't do much to add to the story, aside from maybe giving Deadpool a power that he doesn't actually have. Although I guess he also additionally sets up an unneeded, unnecessary cameo from a digitally de-aged Professor X pre-wheelchair, suggesting that Wolverine actually played a part in linking the two up. The young Storm made a cameo in a deleted scene, and when we see Stryker, we get a shot of his frozen son. Outside the mutants that would make an appearance in future films from the past, the movie also had a whole slew of characters it introduced in passing. For a brief point in time, there's this wholesome old couple that take Wolverine in. He's got nowhere else to go, and they give him a place to stay, a meal to eat, and clothes to wear. It's some of the only kindness this character's ever given, and it's kind of endearing. But apparently these characters are supposed to be a take on Guardian and Vindicator? Two questions. One, how? And two, why? Silver Fox's sister is revealed to be Emma Frost, though she wouldn't be for long, and I think there's a Quicksilver in there somewhere. No, not that one. And not that one either. Of course, that would make no sense, but these movies are pretty much nonsense continuity-wise. This whole thing was a failure conceptually. We saw enough of Wolverine's origin in glimpses, and they were more interesting when left that way. Our minds could fill in the blanks, even though apparently his couldn't. Never mind the fact that this movie is both trying to keep continuity with that set of films, while also having a complete re-envisionist history. All of X2 was about Wolverine's origins and his relationship with Stryker. We've already seen a better version of these events play out later down the timeline. This was not needed. That's not even mentioning the fact that we know nothing's gonna happen to Wolverine because he's already made it into future installments. And also, because he's made unstoppable. There's no real threat or any sense of danger throughout. The special effects for the most part are horribly goofy, and even at the time felt a little bit off. There's over-reliance on green screen with very strange perspectives, and CGI claws that look like they'd be better suited in a children's cartoon. Which is especially confusing and distracting when this effect has been achieved through other means much better in the past. Obviously, a lot of this movie, and in general, a lot of these movies were retconned over time. But this seems to be the only one that was immediately and completely forgotten about. Very few elements from this particular film have been carried over into the films that are attached to it, except for maybe one major exception. Overall, when X-Men Origins isn't good, it's bad. Like, really, really, really bad. But it's also a fun kind of bad. I think it's one worth watching and rewatching. You'd be forgiven for hating it for what it was, but you gotta love what it led to. Without this installment, who knows if we'd ever get any of these. With that being said, if you liked this video and you'd want to see me tackle the rest of the Foxman franchise, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"You're a mutant."
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.